Hello friends, and welcome back to another video, and a special big hello if you are new. Today I'm going to be sharing with you my March wrap-up. In March I read 4 books. I read 2 physical books and 2 ebooks, so as always we'll start with physical books. The first book that I read was The Master and the Margarita by Mikhail Bulgakov. This is set in Soviet Russia, and it's a very dry satire type of book. Okay. Whew. Anyway, it essentially tells the story of Satan and his cronies. They come to Moscow and they wreak havoc everywhere they go. And they really reveal the true natures of the citizens of Moscow. And most of those natures are very bad. This is much more in tune with C.S. Lewis's Screw Tape Letters than necessarily being something sinister. It also has like a novel within a novel, so it also tells the story of Jesus's crucifixion, primarily through Pontius Pilate. So kind of his view, I mean obviously it's fiction, but his view before Jesus's crucifixion, his view during it, and how he feels in the aftermath of it. I really loved this book a lot. I gave it 4.5 out of 5 stars. I feel like it is a book that you really need to study. And I don't know that the average person who picks this book up could really absorb everything that it has. I feel like you'd have to be really skilled in like knowing literary devices, but also I think you'd have to be really skilled in like the history of Soviet Russia as well. I used a website called Lit Charts, I think. I'll link it below, but basically at the end of each chapter I would read the chapter summary. So they had different sections of the chapter summarized, and then they would take that and tell you what that section of the chapter meant. So it would break down any type of literary devices, any type of foreshadowing that you needed to kind of look out for later on in the book, how it tied into history, different like literary works that were referenced. And I think that really helped me absorb everything that this book had to offer, or at least as much as I possibly could. For example, I would have never known there were references to how in Soviet Russia writers, you know, if they were writing a book like The Master and the Margarita, they could have, you know, been in trouble. So a lot of times writers had their novels memorized within their heads, which is just insane to think that this whole thing was memorized in someone's head. But I really loved it. I don't think that it's a book for everyone. It is kind of, it's like a dark humor. And again, it really reveals the worst in humans. But if you're interested, I really recommend. I would like to come back to this book at some point in my life. I think having a better foundation of it. I went into this blind, which I definitely do not recommend. But I think having a really good foundation for it and then coming back to it years later, I think I'll be able to take in so much more than I was like this initial read. But anyway, that was that one. The next book that I read, I don't know where it's at, was The Frozen River by Ariel Lawhon. This tells the story of Martha Ballard, who was a real-life midwife in the late 1700s, so right after the American Revolution. Real-life Martha Ballard kept a journal, and in her journal she would just write the date, the weather, and different events that happened. So any births or deaths that happened, and any kind of newsworthy events, and that was it. It was very emotionless, her journal entries were. And in her real life journals, she details that a pastor's wife was assaulted by 3 men. And she went to the young woman after her assault and like kind of checked her over for injuries and things like that, because being a medically trained midwife in a small community, I think in Maine, she worked as a medical professional for things outside of like midwifery. The Frozen River is obviously fictional, and it takes that incident where a pastor's wife is assaulted by men, and she presses charges against it and against the men, and then the novel opens up with one of the men who assaulted her being found dead, frozen in the river. So it kind of becomes this mystery of who murdered this man. And so not only is there going to be a trial over the assault, but there's also going to be the trial over the murder, and they kind of overlap, and they really polarize the town on like whose side they're on, and it causes a lot of divide. And I don't know, it's just really good. When I finished this book, this is the first Ariel Lawhon book that I've read, and when I finished this book, I wished so much that I was a writer and that I had that talent and I could find different women throughout history like Ariel Lawhon does. From my understanding, that's what all of her books essentially are. And she gives life to their stories. It's obviously fictional, but she's still telling their story, and I wish that I could do that. It took me a while to get through this book. In the author's note, Ariel Lawhon describes it as a river, so it moves very gently and then it picks up momentum as it goes, and I definitely think that, because it took me a while to get through the first half, but then I devoured the second half and didn't want to stop. It was there was a lot more like triggering issues than I expected going into it. So definitely be on the lookout for that. I'm not someone who gets too triggered by things, but it was a lot more than I had expected. So definitely like be mindful of that if you go into it. But this was also like a 4.5-star read for me. Moving on to ebooks, like I said, I read 2. The very first book is a love song. I think it's For Ricki Wilde by Tia Williams. I read 7 Days in June by Tia Williams over the summer, and I loved it and knew that I wanted to read more of her work. So hence why I read the love song of Ricki Wilde, and I think that I liked it more than 7 Days in June. It tells the story of Ricki. She is a young woman, and she is part of an affluent Atlanta family. They kind of own a funeral empire, or like a funeral home empire, and it's kind of expected of her to go into the family business like her older sisters had, but that's not really the life that Ricki wants to lead. She wants to be a floral designer, so she moves to Harlem, and there's kind of an event that leads her to Harlem, and it all ties together. But anyway, so she moves to Harlem and opens her flower shop. While she's in Harlem, she starts encountering a young man who's just very mysterious, but she feels instantly drawn to, and there are some kind of weird circumstances that keep happening with him. Unbeknownst to Ricki, kind of in the first half of the very first few chapters, this man is actually from the Harlem Renaissance, and he has been cursed to kind of live forever. It kind of, in some ways, very loosely reminded me of Addie LaRue. And, that's just kind of the premise of the story. I don't want to go into too much detail. But I'm sorry, Clementine is being insane today. You can see her crazy hair back there. I'm really sorry. But anyway, I loved this book. I think it's kind of marketed as like a historical fiction, magical realism, romance. But I think at its heart, it's really a romance with the self. Getting to see Ricki come into her own and to be who she wants to be, and to go on that journey with her was some of my favorite parts of the novel. I also really loved how to get to read about the Harlem Renaissance. That's a time period that I've not read a lot in or about, and I would love to read more. If you have any recommendations, same with like the Frozen River, any type of like American Revolution, post-American Revolution, like historical fiction, like please let me know. But I really enjoyed that, and it really kind of loosely went into like different gentrification of how Harlem was in the 1920s versus Harlem of today, and how kind of wealthier white people have kind of swept in and taken over that area, and changed it from what it was at those time. And those historical places that were so important to the Harlem Renaissance are gone. And I thought that was really beautiful how she kind of wove that into the story, and it was done very well. But I really loved it. It was honestly, in terms of like enjoyability and story and creativeness, it was probably my favorite read of the month. And lastly, if you've probably seen any of my wrap-up videos, then you know that I am an Elsie Silver girly. I love Elsie Silver's writing, and she released a new book in March, which was Wilde Side, which is part of the Rose Hill series. It tells the story of a young woman, Tabby, whose sister has passed away, and now she has her nephew. Unbeknownst to Tabby at the time, her sister actually left the custody of her child to her neighbor. I can't think of what his name is, though. Let me look that up really quick. Reese. How did I forget that? Reese. But she has left custody of her, son to Reese. And so, I mean, there's obviously a lot more to it. But basically, Reese and Tabby decide to get married. It's a marriage of convenience. It works out for Reese. Due to his job, he has to travel out of the country a lot. And with his visa, that's, him staying for long periods is not possible. And then Tabby also obviously gets to have her nephew and to care for her nephew. And as someone who loves her nephews more than anything in the entire world, I too would do whatever it takes to make sure that they were safe and provided for. When I first found out that this was going to be a marriage of convenience, I was like, how in the world is Elsie Silver going to pull this off? I don't think I've really read any. No, I think I've read one, Marriage of Convenience, and it was more historical, like Regency based. So it kind of made sense. And I was like, how in the world are we going to have a more like modern time Marriage of Convenience? But she pulled it off like perfectly. It was amazing. And I loved it so much. I will say Reese this isn't a spoiler. He's a wrestler. He's a fighter. That's what he does for a living. And there are times where he has to do like promo, or it's in like Reese's point of view and he is doing his like bits. I know a lot of that. It talks about how it's, it's scripted. It's a storyline that's being sold. And it was so cringy. It really took me out of the story so much. And again, I know that's the point. That's like the whole purpose. That's what it is. But for me, I was just like, what the heck? I didn't care for it as much. But all in all, I really did enjoy the story. It was good. And I do recommend it. I'm really excited for the next book. I think it's the last book in the Rose Hill series. And then I think it was one day last week that Elsie Silver had announced that she's like been contracted to do another series, and I think she has like 2 standalones. And I'm just like, I just love her writing. I love the way she tells her stories. Chestnut Springs still to this day remains my favorite. Especially, what was my favorite? Reckless, I think. Theo and Winter was my favorite, but I still will read anything that she writes. Hey friends, thank you so much for being here and listening to me babble on about books. Unbeknownst to you, I talked about 3 books in my first take. But as always, Clementine was being crazy and I couldn't concentrate and I had no idea what I was talking about. So if I repeated myself, I'm sorry, because it was a lot. But anyway, thank you guys so much for being here, and I will see you in my next video. Bye.